Hello, everyone. I'm Lily. Today, I want to tell you a story about my stepmother. It was a long journey for me to accept and treat my stepmother as my mother. I used to have a very happy family. My father was the director of a large company. My mother was a literature teacher. Just imagine how I could be educated in such an environment. People believe I would be very docile, very polite, and know the right things to do. And it was true. My parents were very proud of me. I always topped the class in academic achievement. I was a young miss from a rich family who was pretty, lovely, and very understandable. My life was like a happy fairy tale that everyone wishes and desires. My mother tried her best to shape and educate me. Sometimes I looked up to her and thought she was a fairy, gentle and kind, selfless and tolerant. Every time I hugged her from behind to whisper to her ear my secrets, I felt the whole world had nothing that could replace my mother. My father was busy with work, so he had less time for me, but that was never the reason for him not to spend his precious time with me. We got along well. My family of three always spent time together whenever possible. I was happy about that. Time went smoothly until one day I heard that my mother had to be hospitalized because she fainted while teaching. Hearing that news, my ears seemed to buzz. I ran quickly to the hospital, and my emotions were in turmoil. I told myself that perhaps it was just because she was exhausted. She had always been very devoted to her career as a teacher. Probably so. By the time I got to the hospital, I saw my dad and Miss Dan, my mother's best friend, sitting outside the emergency room. The doctor came out of the emergency room with a pensive face. "Sir, please come to my office. I need to discuss your wife's condition." At that time, I still did not understand what was going on. I sat next to Miss Dan and was blankly worshipping. "Will my mother be okay?" asked I, to which Miss Dan responded, "I hope your mother is okay, Lily. Don't worry about a thing, okay?" I was calmer when appeased by Miss Dan. She was like my second mother. She understood my personality and interests even more than my mother at times. But strangely, until then, she had not been married. She told me she still had her old and weak mother to take care of. She could not afford to leave her mother to get married and find happiness for herself. She was filial. My vague thoughts were smashed when Dad came out with my mother's results in hand. He looked at me, a gaze that was hard to describe. He had never looked at me like that. I felt insecure. "Lily, your mother has end-stage blood cancer." From that day on, my life was completely disrupted. However, with every single last hope, I still wish that my mother's illness will be cured. She had to quit her job at school and go to the radiation clinic regularly. During that time, Miss Dan was always there to take care of both my mother and me in place of my father, because his work could not take long leave. I visited my mother every day, talked to her, and found that she had to fight so hard when receiving treatment. She was very optimistic until she took her last breath after being diagnosed for 3 months. That day was dark and gloomy. My dear mother held my hand and said, "Lily, I am sorry. I love you. Please live happily." I locked myself in my room with so much negative thought. I could not imagine how I would live without my mother. I need my mom. I need her. Please give her back to me. I walked out of that hospital room, living a life full of memories of my mother without any escapes. 6 months later, my father took Miss Dan home and told me, "From now on, Miss Dan will be your mother, Lily. Please obey her." Needless to say, that was the second shocking news for me after the news that my mother suffered from terminal cancer. My father and Miss Dan as a couple? It was unbelievable. My mom only passed away 6 months ago, but my dad was already in a hurry to replacing her? And why did it have to be Miss Dan? I just couldn't understand why Miss Dan wanted to steal the position in my father's heart and become my stepmother when she was so close to my mother before she died. My dad didn't explain any further. He only led Miss Dan home and said so, ignoring my attitude and emotions. Ever since my mother died, my father had been worn out and his hair was gray. But why, Dad? I thought you missed Mom so much too. Why did you have to do that? I hated my father. I hated Miss Dan. I hated those two people, and I missed my mother even more. My study was in decline, and I was seriously downgraded. I was no longer interested and worked hard as before. From an excellent student, I often skipped classes and hung out with some bad friends. Because my allowance was huge since my family was rich, many of them wanted to be my best friends. I went to the bar, drank alcohol, and often came home late. I let myself become a bad girl, but for some reason, I still didn't get expelled and were still qualified for the college entrance exam. Most importantly, my dad didn't know I was as laid back as I was. You may as how. It was all because of Miss Dan. She always followed me to clean up the consequences that I caused. How despicable and cowardly. Did she want to use that to win my heart and persuade me to accept her? No way. It was ridiculous. Ever since my dad took Miss Dan home, I have sworn in front of my mom's grave that I would never accept anyone else as my mother, and especially Miss Dan. It will never happen. I wondered if she took advantage of the fact that she was my mother's best friend to approach my father. I believe she must have a desire for his fortune or status and power from my father. What a shame. Miss Dan still tried to cook, clean the house, and take care of me on behalf of my father every day. I figured my father respected her for that, and somehow she could also feel relieved for being able to make up for the loss of my mother's love to me. He did not know how deeply hurt I was. One day I found out that I was pregnant. Damn it. It was just one time I got super drunk and did it with a schoolmate. I didn't think the consequences would be that heavy. I called him to talk about the baby, but only receive apathy and concealment. Miss Dan walked into the room and looked at me with angry eyes upon hearing my phone call. Who did she think she was to stare at me with those eyes? You are so spoiled. How wasting your mother has loved and hoped for you so much. I have always tried to protect you, but why do you still let this bad thing happen? Said Miss Dan. You have no right to mention my mother to me. I despise you. I angrily scolded to her face. Miss Dan slapped me, a hard and strong slap. I was both crying and hurting. The resentment towards her grew more and more in me. But it was unexpected that a week later, I received the news that my father would let me study abroad instead of forcing me to take the university exam. And I was even more surprised to learn that Miss Dan would accompany me there. What did that evil woman want? She didn't allow me to abort that baby at all costs, and forced me to go abroad to give birth to that child. I hope you will give birth safely. Did she think I had to obey her no matter what nonsense she said? I wanted to resent, but I was afraid my dad would know I was pregnant. He would be shocked, and I would have a stroke. I didn't want to hurt him either, so I accepted Miss Dan's request. I thought that when she went abroad, she would be like an evil fox that bullied and tormented me, because when at home, I didn't treat her well and always despised her. Every day, Miss Dan made me follow my prescribed living regimen, studying my father's business and doing housework at the same time. I had to walk and exercise regularly. There were even days when I was extremely tired, but still not allowed to skip any tasks of the day. I was forced to do it because she said that if I didn't, my pregnancy would be told to my father. The gentle and psychotic Dan, who had been my mother's best friend, was not there anymore. At that moment was just a cruel stepmother and full of intrigue. I kept that thought during my pregnancy until the day I gave birth to the baby. I was in critical condition due to severe anemia when I needed a cesarean section. I didn't remember anything until I woke up with my dad by my side. I was startled. My dad gave me a sign to tell me to lie down. Stay and rest. I understand. I'm not angry with you. I still did not know what was happening, why my dad was in the hospital room with me, and why he was not angry with me, but I was too weak to talk. When the doctor placed my baby next to me, I had a strange feeling that I could not explain. So that was the sacred sentiment that people kept mentioning when they talked about motherhood. Suddenly, I missed my mother deeply. I finally understood how much she loved and worried about me. And at that very moment, a familiar voice came from Dad's phone. Lily, my dear daughter, maybe these are the last words I can send to you. I was also shocked to learn about my illness, but what worries me most are you, my daughter. I know that with your sweet personality, you will have a difficult time after I leave this world. But baby, please accept Miss Dan as your mother. That is my last wish and plea. Miss Dan didn't get married because she knew that she couldn't give birth. When she had an abortion once with her ex-boyfriend, that was a huge shock to her. I know I am selfish because I wanted her to take care of your father and you wholeheartedly after I'm gone. She said she didn't want me to think of her as a greedy woman for intruding on our family life. But please understand and sympathize with us, Lily, and do not cry. I hope that when you hear these words, you will understand what you should do. Goodbye, my beloved Lily. Miss Dan, who gave me blood transfusions during the anemia hospital, is now in the recovery room. Miss Dan was afraid that you and I would be pressured by public opinion when learning that you were pregnant, so she asked me to let her take you abroad. She didn't want you to get rid of the baby and have to regret it like her in your later life. I cried like a child. Only then did I understand why Miss Dan cared about me so much. Even though the incision was still painful, I carried my baby to find her in the recovery room. Looking at her pale and emaciated face, I cried out, "Mom, I'm so sorry."